The next talk, I think it is Benny. Benny, can you, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, can you please share your slides?
Yes.
So Benny Pinkas is also a very well-known face in crypto community, but also in security community. He is from Bar Ilan University, and he was involved also in Israeli contact tracing, which is a story for itself. I don't know how much of it Benny is going to reveal to us, but anyway, I am very happy that he accepted our invitation. Benny, the stage is yours.
Hi, thank you, Ahmad, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll talk about some technical issues and about the Israeli perspective and why we decided to make our application different. I must say I do not represent the Israeli government. So me and Eyal Ronen we volunteered to design, a system for contract tracing, and they decided to use it. But we definitely have disagreements with them, and we don't represent the government in any way. So, what happens with contact tracing is that people meet each other, and then Alice is identified as being COVID positive, and we need to inform whoever met Alice. If you want to do it manually, it's not gonna be an easy task. This is a photo taken this Friday when they decided to open some Israeli malls for the first time after a few months and had do it on Black Friday. So you see it wasn't, a good experience, and doing manual contact tracing here is impossible. So you want to do automated contact tracing. And actually Google and Apple and credit card companies, they know a lot about where we are, but they don't want to provide this data to the government. So actually Google could have done contact tracing for all Android users by itself, but they don't provide this information to all governments. And in Israel, what happened early on is that, this is different than I think all other countries, is that the government asked the security service to perform contact tracing using technology which was previously used to track terrorists. So I guess that it is based on cellular data, there's no public information. So they tried doing contact tracing with that. And this is very problematic. It's very problematic in terms of civil rights. You don't want to use these technologies on your citizens. And also it's not sufficiently accurate. So we got a huge number of false positives. But on the other hand, it's very easy for the government. You have an existing tool. They had to scale it, which was probably a huge headache, but they can claim that they were doing something. But people don't want the government to do that. And there was an initiative from the health ministry to do something better and more privacy preserving. So what we would like to do, so as cryptographers, we look at an ideal world and we try to implement it. So in an ideal world, we would have had a trusted party. Everyone would tell the trusted party who he met. And the trusted party is not going to leak anything. So the trusted party knows all contacts. It doesn't need to know the locations, but it knows who met whom. And then if Alice tells the trusted party that she is sick, then the trusted party knows who met Alice. So in a centralized output, the trusted party would give to the government all the contacts, the physical contacts of the sick person, and the government will tell these people to stay at home. In a decentralized system, the trusted party doesn't give any information to the government. It gives this information to the people who met Alice. And now they should decide to stay at home and maybe tell the government, but it's up to them. It's not for the government to decide, what they should do, and the government doesn't know who they met unless they decide to tell this to the government. Now, the question when we look at centralized versus decentralized is who controls the data, the government or users, because we have to implement it without a trusted party. So we have to do a technological solution to mimic a trusted party. So the question is who controls the data and who gets the output? The government knows who met Alice or the users? And Asian countries mostly went for centralized solutions. And then we must trust that the government doesn't misuse its power. And Western countries, most of them went for the decentralized approach. And there we must trust that users will do the right thing. So the challenge is that, Asian countries, they seem to have fought COVID pretty well using the centralized approach. And the question is, we can get to a similar level of success without, giving all this information to the government. So our basic approach is that, we should design a system so the users must trust that the system preserves their rights, both in terms of privacy and in terms of accuracy. Because if they don't trust the system, they will try to cheat. So Israelis will try to cheat. Okay, I'm not sure if Germans or Swiss people, but Israel, they try to cheat the system. So we'll start a cat and mouse game, right? So I'll go to the supermarket without my cell phone. So they're going to check at the entrance if I have my cell phone. So I'm going to show the cell phone at the entrance. Then I'm going to turn Bluetooth off when I get into the supermarket. And it's going to be an infinite game if we start, trying to see who's smarter. And we might end up with something like this, and we don't want together when we have put bracelets on each person's hand. Okay, so we want to somehow convey to the users that they can trust the system and it preserves their rights, and therefore they will use it without us having to force them to use it. So the current situation, I'm going to the end, and then I'll describe the way that how we got there, is that the country rolled out a decentralized tracing app, which was not based on the Google Apple solution, because there were good reasons for the app to use location data, and Google and Apple did not allow to use location data. And then 40% of the users installed the app, even though there was no effective campaign. But then most of them uninstalled it for two major reasons. One was in terms of usability, especially battery usage, because we couldn't use the GAN API. And because of loss of trust in the government, which is, I think, the most serious problem. People didn't want, because of all this Secret Service tracing, they didn't want to give the government another access to their phone, even though the app was promised to be open source, etc. They just didn't trust the government. So I'll describe more about the solution. So how does a decentralized contact tracing work? Each user keeps a diary, a log of his whereabouts. So the diary could be in terms of GPS location. This was the first version of Hamagen app. This was the Israeli app. It could be in terms of BLE. This was the second version. Or it could be of QR codes, which you scan when you enter stores. And then sick users send this diary to the government. The government publishes it. And then everyone checks in his own diary if he received one of those BLE messages sent by a sick person or was in one of these places. So the first version of the Israeli app used GPS location, but this was quite inaccurate. I live in a high-story floor next to a mall, and I got, I think, 5 different warnings, which were sent to me of people that were in the mall, even though I was at home. BLE is more accurate, but it requires support from Google and Apple or special hardware, and this makes it hard to deploy it. And QR codes are simple, but they're effective only for designated spaces, and they require user action to scan the codes. So, we didn't try it. So with BLE, most of you know it already. The phone sends a message, which maybe changes every 5 minutes, sends a random value, which should be only readable in short distance. And then if a user is COVID positive, he can choose, if he wants to give the government a list of the values that he broadcasted. The government broadcasts these values to everyone. All users compare this list to the values that they received. And if there's a match, they can choose to report this to the government. It's up to them. If they see a match and they don't want to report to the government, they can decide not to report it. That's the decentralized design. Now, Google and Apple implemented it. So usually, Android and iOS prevent applications from efficiently sending BLE messages. And they suggested an API that enables this for contact tracing. And what the API does, it chooses a random key for each day, and that's important, per day. And all BLE messages for that day are generated from that daily key. And then the infected person's temporary exposure key or the daily key of that person are broadcasted to all users. So the resolution is in terms of days. And the companies prevent apps. I mean, they should, only apps that get permission from the companies can use this API, and apps that use location data cannot use the API. That's a big no-no. So my interpretation of Gaen is that what they say is that we want something simple that will work. So perfect is the enemy of good. And they wanted to deploy something quickly and widely and to go to the, most, the widest common, factor and just have it work and no changes afterwards. So this is why they choose that solution. And something else, this is actually, these are good reasons. I mean, you want to deploy something, it doesn't need to be perfect, that's good. But also, location data for those companies is a public relations nightmare. So they just decided to avoid using location data. It's very good to explain to users that your location is not being used, but they don't allow also good users of location data. And also, as other people have said, although these are only companies, they control the market and they can effectively decide on the rules. So they can come to governments and tell them, use these rules, or you cannot, use Android and iOS. You have to deploy your own hardware, and almost no country deploys its own hardware. So something that we noticed when we looked at the Swiss app is that there are huge differences between countries and between how people behave in different countries. So in Switzerland, for instance, people care about privacy. So you want to protect the identity of the COVID positive persons. So the system, at least, the initial version only informed people about the day in which the infection happened. So I don't know, where I was, where I met an infected person, because this might reveal information about it. In Israel, people ask more questions. So we knew if I tell someone that they, met a COVID positive person, last Sunday, and therefore they have to stay at home, they'll just laugh and won't believe me. So therefore, the Israeli app gives you, the time, like in an hour resolution of where you met the sick person. So you'll know, I was in a supermarket, so it's probably likely that I met someone there, and I wasn't at home. And there are other differences which I'll highlight in a minute. So there are other issues. One is that in Israel, we think that it's more likely that there will going to be attacks against the system, the attacks that other people described. It's either going to do by amateur people, amateur hackers. They want to show that they can hack the system and gain fame, or by malicious hackers. Actually, I think that amateur hackers are the most serious threat. Also something that we noted is, people might claim that they were exposed to COVID even though they were not, in order to gain benefits, like students before an exam that they don't want to take. And if people do not trust the system, they will start cheating. This is obvious. So how is our solution different? So there's a trade-off between privacy and explainability. So in Gaen, they only reveal the day of the contact. So they don't explain to me where I met the COVID positive person. We reveal both the location and the hour, the course time of the contact, to convince users that they're indeed exposed, to have a better chance of them taking the notification seriously. Also, in terms of privacy, Gaen sends a single key per day. So this enables attackers to link all IDs that the infected person sent on the same day. Okay. Also, it makes it impossible to redact sensitive time periods. So if someone goes to see a psychologist, it cannot redact this time period, so people will not be able to identify that he was there. Instead, we use hourly keys, and the application reveals a different key per hour, not per day. So it's possible to link all messages sent by the same user in a day, but in an hour, but not in a full day. So we use some tree structure, and if we're going to have too many people, we can resort to a daily key, but usually we can work with an hour key. Okay. So this gives more privacy because you cannot link different hours. It also allows users at the Ministry of Health to redact different periods of time. So when I was asleep at home, I don't need to send my keys. If I was stuck in a traffic jam, I don't want to send alone in a car. I don't want to send my keys because I don't want to notify people who were in cars next to me because there's no chance of them being infected. So using hourly keys, it's slightly more complicated, but it offers better privacy and better accuracy. Also, relay attacks that other people describe, where someone places a Bluetooth receiver in a place where COVID patients are likely to appear, like an emergency room, and then transmits them in another place, like a supermarket, to get a lot of false alarms. So I can see kids doing this, okay, Israeli kids, and this will reduce trust in the system. So again, is insecure with regard to these attacks, and we suggest sending inside the message a coarse geohash of the location of the sender. In terms of privacy, the receiver already knows this location, so we don't, the receiver knows where he is, so we can send him a geohash of that location. And this information is known by the receiver, but not by the server. So we incorporated it into the protocol. The technical challenge there wasn't that easy because we had to make sure that everything fits in 16 bytes and still gives you, good security against reasonable attacks, but we managed to do that. Here there's some trade-off between security and privacy because the location information of the messages you receive is still kept on your phone. So if someone compromises your phone, he'll be able to see, where you were. This is a trade-off you can choose to, which chose to take. And there are still more attacks, more advanced attacks that are still possible. Something else that we added is proving exposure to COVID. So the situation is like, the government publishes the values that were sent by new COVID positive persons. And then a student says, yeah, I received one of these values. And then they say, okay, so you cannot take the exam tomorrow, or you don't have to go to work. You have a paid sick day or something like this. So you can assume, some, sector wants to go on strike. So all of the people in that sector report that they were exposed to COVID on the previous day. So again, people can just claim that they saw this value. Our design enables the users to prove that they were exposed. So basically, there is some secret information that is only sent in the BLE. And if you want to prove that you're exposed, you should show this, secret information. And again, it was challenging to put everything in 16 bytes. Also, in terms of usage, in terms of policy, we want to prevent coercion. So we wanted to give the users a choice on everything they do. Okay. So the app usage is voluntary. Users are not forced to use the app, even not by the employers. Users should be given the option to decide if a notification is correct or just ignore it. If they ignore it, no one knows that they ignored it. They decide whether to notify the authorities. Users can disable Bluetooth whenever they want. They can delete the keys for specific time intervals. When you go to do something sensitive, you just don't send messages during that time. Or if you do send messages, you can erase them afterwards. And you can delete your notification history so my employer cannot check if I received a notification about an exposure. So everything was put here to kind of say to the users, look, we trust you, but please do the right thing. We don't try to track you. It's up to you to do the right thing. Okay.
Excuse me,
and,
just 5 minutes left.
Yeah, that's great. Because before that, otherwise, users will try to cheat, and we don't try to, try, the cat and mouse game with them, because then we'll get to these bracelets, which we don't want to use. And the system was a bit more complicated. So you see, I mean, this is the design. It's a bit more complicated, but once you implement it, it's there and it runs. It's more complicated again, but whatever. So what's the current status? It's not very good. So sending and receiving BLE messages without the Google Apple API is hard. And the companies require that no location data is used. Now, Israel decided that its app must use location data for two reasons. The main reason is that there's a huge part of the population that doesn't use smartphones, mostly the ultra-Orthodox, but they can get warnings using location data, so therefore we need location data. And Google and Apple might have been happy with people running two apps, one with BLE without location data, another with location data, but we cannot expect users to put two apps. So the app was designed to use location data without the Google Apple API. Therefore, it used too much batteries, especially on iOS devices. Another reason Israel decided to use location data is to support better security, especially against the relay attacks. And this is the last but sad slide. So the application failed. People did not use it. So a lot of people downloaded it, but people didn't use it. There were two main reasons. One was technological, especially battery usage. Okay. And the other, which was more important, is that the trust issue. So people thought that since the Secret Service is doing tracking, perhaps they're going to track through this app, even though it's open source. But perhaps they're going to track everything I do on my phone. And perhaps the government is not doing enough. There are too many patients, so why should I, do anything and put things on my phone, etc. So people just didn't use the app or uninstalled it, and there was not enough, public campaign to use it. And it might be, our impression was that, the people in the health ministry were happy just using the Secret Service solution, even though it's not very effective. So right now, the app is not being used, although we like the technology and we invested a lot of time in designing it. And the most important thing we can do, I would say, do the regular things, the simple things without any apps. Wear a mask and do social distancing and wash your hands often. And perhaps from the lessons we learn here, we can do, some other, useful, interesting, technological contributions. And that's the end of my talk. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thanks a lot, Benny. Any questions, Lisa?
At the moment, I don't see any questions.
There's a question from Serge. But no.
Okay.
Let's go on.
Yes, okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, Benny. I like your definition of centralized and decentralized system quite a lot, but the way you define it, especially the centralized system, which says that the government learns who has met whom, it's a bit confusing to define it this way, because some existing systems which are deployed and which are called centralized right now are not satisfying this definition. So it's a bit embarrassing to propose a definition which doesn't match a system which already exists.
I think that you're right. I think we took here, or I took in this talk, it's easier to talk about the extremes. Maybe one extreme is the Asian experience where the government knows everything. The other extreme is the, completely decentralized. And it's much harder to, to describe the, the middle, variants, which are, perhaps provide a better trade-off, but are harder to describe. And I fully agree that your comment is right.
So any other questions? If not, then we go to the next